Thank you, Grace. And welcome, everyone. I'm Stacy Gladding from the Energy Star program, and we're excited to have you all join us today for our webinar. It's about engaging commercial tenants and occupants in energy efficiency. We have 4 speakers today that I think you'll learn a lot from this afternoon. First, we'll have Cindy Jacobs talk about the Charter Tenant Program, and she's a senior advisor for EPA Energy Star. Then we'll hear from Daniel Egan, who is the Vice President and the Head of Sustainability and Utilities at Vornado Realty Trust. Next, we'll hear from Will Teichman, the Senior Director of Strategic Operations at KIMCO Realty Corporation. And finally, we'll hear from Sam Stockdale, the VP of Global Real Estate at JPMorgan Chase. And then at the end, there'll be time for some questions and answers for you to submit your questions. So, please submit your questions as you have them during the presentation in the chat box, and we'll be happy to answer those at the end. So with that, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Cindy Jacobs to provide some additional information.
Great. Thanks, Stacy. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon or good morning if you're on the other coast. I'm going to just spend a few minutes. I don't want to take time away from our fabulous presenters here today, but I just want to give you a quick overview of what we've been doing in the tenant space. So first, we've been working for a bunch of years to provide information to help encourage landlord-tenant collaboration and provide strategies for improvements in tenant spaces. So these are just some of the documents available on our website. We've got some great case studies. We've got our Bring Your Green to Work materials for managers, owners, or tenant organizations to give to occupants, and competition guide that can be done at any level. So I encourage you to take a look at those on our website. But I'm going to spend most of my time today talking about something that is a more recent development, and the thing that really kind of crystallized this effort was the Energy Efficiency Improvement Act of 2015. This was federal legislation. It was really focused on improving efficiency in tenant spaces. It had responsibilities for 3 government agencies, not just the EPA, but also Department of Energy and GSA. Department of Energy to do some research on best practices and some other things related to that, and as well for the Energy Information Administration to gather some data on energy use in tenant spaces, and for GSA to provide model leasing language. But the thing that I'm focusing on is the direction to EPA through the Energy Star program to provide recognition for, that should say efficient tenant spaces, not efficiency, as part of what we do here at Energy Star. And sort of the reveal here. This is what the decal looks like for a pilot program that I'm going to talk to you about. The 2018 Energy Star Charter Tenant Space Pilot. We had a couple iterations of this, started back in 2017, but this is what you might start seeing on some tenant spaces. So let me tell you what that's all about. We launched this pilot program in the fall of 2017, starting just with office tenants, and we sort of see how that goes and hope we can expand down the road, perhaps for retail and warehouse spaces. So we worked with what we called charter tenants who applied to us to be part of this program, as well as landlords who were very involved in many cases, sometimes testing for their own spaces. But we worked with all of those folks to test and implement the plan. Department of Energy provided support through a couple of the labs for some analysis to help with the pilot. And we ended up having 140 spaces start out in the pilot, which was, when I was asked the question, how many do you think you want to be part of this way back when we started it, 20, 25. And then we got this terrific interest, and I didn't want to leave anybody out. So we said, hey, everybody can come participate, but not everybody's going to go all the way through to the recognition phase. And in fact, we anticipate having, when we make our announcement in a few days, I'll talk about 50 spaces that have done that final application, have been approved for Energy Star Charter Tenant Space recognition, which is terrific. We're thrilled with all of that, with those numbers. So how did those charter tenants earn the recognition? we developed a set of criteria. This is just a quick rundown. You estimate the energy use of the space. You have to have meters for at least lighting and plug load. You have to have efficient lighting. You need to be using efficient equipment in the space. Purchase is probably not quite the right word because in some cases there's legacy equipment, but for the pilot we gathered an inventory of the equipment, but we're testing what the threshold should be for efficient equipment in the space. Essentially it boils down to having Energy Star equipment and then agreeing to share data with the landlord upon request. You have a professional engineer or registered architect verify the information and stamp the application, which is the same process we have for whole building Energy Star certification, and submit the application to us. We review it and then award the recognition. So quick next steps, and I'll be able to pass this on here. June 12th, so next Tuesday, we are going to announce via email to all of our Energy Star partners and all of our charter tenants the list of those spaces that have achieved the Energy Star charter tenant space designation. And what we're doing now, and we'll be continuing to do for a while here, is assessing the results of the pilot, figuring out what we need to do to bring it to market scale, what the requirements will be. We've learned a lot, and we know that there are a number of things we need to really think through. We'll also be working again with the Department of Energy Labs to refine the analysis based on feedback we've gotten through the pilot, and we're going to announce milestones as we figure them out at this website, on our EnergyStar.gov website at a page called Tenant Recognition. So be checking there for updates. And I think you'll hear a little bit more about this effort in the next presentation. And so without further ado, I am going to pass on to Dan Egan of Vornado.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Cindy. And good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Egan. I am Vice President of Sustainability and Utilities for Vornado Realty Trust. We are very proud to say we are a 5-time Energy Star Partner of the Year award recipient and have been working hand in hand with the EPA Energy Star Group for many years on a number of different efforts. And really, it's worth saying, my hat is off to Cindy and team for carrying this charter tenant program across the finish line. It's extremely important in our part of the business to equip ourselves with tools to engage our tenants, and I think that this is a really exciting example that will be very widespread across our tenant base in the future. So I have control here. Let's see if I can do this. Okay, so a brief history on Vornado, just so everyone on the call sort of understands our perspective, the type of real estate that we own. So we are a publicly traded real estate investment trust. We own about 35 million square feet of real estate, heavily concentrated in New York, San Francisco, and Chicago. We are primarily office, high-density urban office locations, as well as some high-value street retail locations also in urban areas. And so we're also primarily existing buildings. So the average age of our building is typically something like 20 to 30 years old. Some of our buildings are actually much older than that. So this timeline here just gives a abridged history of our sustainability program. It really, I think that the charter tenant program and the sort of pillars of how we attack energy efficiency are very well aligned. It really started with a submetering network that we developed in the early 2000s. We saw that the world of leasing in New York City anyways was transitioning from a lease where tenants would pay what's called electric rent inclusion for their electricity consumption, which is a sort of predetermined flat fee per square foot, to a submetered arrangement where tenants would actually pay for the electricity that they consumed. Upon doing that transition, we had the foresight to understand that we had many tenants in our portfolio. This would quickly become quite an accounting exercise in order to bill our tenants regularly on a monthly basis and in a timely manner. That we made sure that the submeters we specified would be cloud computed and would enable us to read and bill our tenants from remotely. So in our portfolio, we don't have anyone walking around with clipboards and recording these meters. We have something that's cloud computed where our accounting department can bill our tenants on a pretty efficient basis, and also our tenants can log in to see their consumption and see their billing history online. Just some other highlights are noted on this slide. We've been, a very early adopter of LEED programs. We like to think of ourselves as a first mover in other energy technology, including cogeneration and solar. And we have a mature process in place of planning for capital projects that reduce energy costs for our buildings. But what we're here to talk about today is primarily our tenants. And just to give you a lay of the land from a regulatory perspective, in both New York City and Chicago, we are legally compelled to submeter our tenant spaces. Local Law 88 in New York will require buildings over 25,000 square feet to submeter their tenants, and actually they brought the threshold down to 5,000 square feet. So by 2025, all tenants over 5,000 square feet will be required to have access to their energy consumption, whether that's on a submetered basis or on a direct to the utility basis. Title 24 in California sort of takes that even a step further and requires, Title 24 has many, many sections, to be clear, but they require spaces to not only be submetered, but that the high and low voltage use of that electricity needs to be separately metered, which takes the awareness of how energy is being consumed down to a much more granular level, where you can actually see your lighting and your plug loads consuming energy separately, and hopefully with that visualization tackle your energy reduction efforts more strategically. So if we go on this slide, I just wanted to sort of point out the difference. I think I've mentioned 3 different ways that our tenants could be charged for electricity. The electric rent inclusion I sort of consider the old school way at this point. It's still certainly in practice today, but by paying a flat rate per square foot, there's, not only does the tenant have zero access to what sort of energy their space is consuming, but the tenant has no incentive to save that energy from an economics perspective. So there's no business case on the tenant's side to perform energy efficiency when they're going to be paying the same amount per square foot to cover electricity costs. In the direct meter situation, which is quite common, the tenant certainly is on the hook for their own electricity costs and pays directly for every kilowatt hour consumed and every kilowatt hour saved. However, there's no conversation between the landlord and the tenant in that circumstance. So where we have tenants that are direct metered, we actually don't have insights into the tenant's consumption because we often don't see that consumption. In a submetered arrangement, you solve for both of those challenges. So the tenant is going to be paying, directly for the energy that they consume. They get the economic benefits for any energy that they save, and also because we are delivering on a monthly basis a financial vehicle that shows the amounts consumed and the costs charged, we are brought together for a conversation on a regular basis with our tenants on energy consumption. And for these reasons, this is why we recognize the submeter as the best practice. And I think it's no coincidence that the the Energy Star for Tenants program is aligned with either a direct meter or submeter configuration, as well as the sharing of that information between the tenant space and the EPA. And to give you a perspective of the economic impact of our submetering, so we recover over 60% of our electricity costs through the submeter. So not only is there this carbon awareness and sustainability play with our submeter, this is a very important accounting function that the submeter plays on our property balance sheets. So the energy that we recover, or the costs rather that we recover through submeter, are then treated differently than the common area electricity costs that we pay in our portfolio, and they flow through the property in a different way. So this is we have a full-time staff that's dedicated to the reading and billing and the analysis of our submeter recovery process. And on the left, we just have a table summarizing how many of our tenants fall under the different categories. So in total, 93% of our tenants nationally are either submetered or direct metered for their electricity consumption, and I anticipate that number to go up to nearly 100%, certainly by 2025, which is the compliance year for Local 88 in New York City. And beyond just billing, I think, I've mentioned this, but the submeter itself provides us and tenants with this very powerful visualization tool. Because we're recording both usage and demand, if you have an energy efficiency project in play, you can measure that, the impact of that project in real time. And because this is the same platform where tenants access their consumption and demand is the same place that they can access their bill, they could also trace out the financial benefits of their energy efficiency project. So on the left is actually a real example of an LED lighting retrofit completed in one of our office spaces. And this was actually completed back in 2011 and 2012 during a more nascent period for LED lights, where we really did want to measure and verify the performance of these lights. And what we saw was, as you can see, the larger blue line was the before case, the red line is the after case, and we saw a total reduction of submetered electricity costs of about 29% just from doing a lighting retrofit in an office space. We never would have gained insight into that, certainly without the submeter, but also with this cloud computed portal, I think it becomes much easier to visually depict the results. We also submeter our base building equipment. So not only do we recommend this approach for tenants, we practice this ourselves on the landlord-controlled equipment. So on the right is a before and after case of our district steam coming into one of our buildings. Right when we first installed the submeter, again, I think this is back in 2009, 2010, we saw there was no pattern whatsoever in terms of the consumption of our steam, indicating that there was quite a bit of after-hours usage happening unbeknownst to the operator. This kind of information empowers the operator to understand and diagnose where problems occur. We made some substantial repairs to our steam infrastructure. It was a Swiss cheese infrastructure full of leaks. After fixing those leaks, you can see a nice and tidy consumption pattern on the bottom, and quite a bit of cost savings that came along with that. And so because we have so many tenants that are submetered, we're also able to bifurcate our landlord or our corporate energy reduction goals. So we have a total goal of a 35% reduction of our energy consumption by 2026, below a 2009 baseline. Because we have such awareness of how much of our energy is consumed by the tenant versus how much is truly controlled by our equipment, we're able to bifurcate our corporate goal into how much falls on us versus the tenants. And so we have a 40% reduction goal for the landlord. We do have a 30% reduction goal with tenants. Many may make the argument that tenants are in control of their own operations and energy consumption. This is not the landlord's responsibility. I would argue that, at least at Vornado, because we're equipped with all of this information, we have a responsibility to communicate to tenants just what they are consuming and what we think they are capable of reducing over time. And so as the tenant base reduces its consumption on a portfolio level, I think that is a sort of key performance indicator of two things. One, that the tenants are making better decisions in their space, but two, that Vornado as a landlord is doing a better job promoting awareness of energy consumption and carbon footprint in the tenant space. So how do we do this? It is all about tenant engagement, and featured here is Ms. Cindy Jacobs, who was kind enough to join us at a tenant sustainability roundtable. What we've done over the years is curate relationships with many of our tenants in the office portfolio. We have, for example, several tenants who are multinational office or multinational firms with office locations across the world. Many of them have facilities managers or sustainability people like myself on staff. We have developed meaningful relationships with them around energy, around being sustainable in their space, around resource conservation in general. And so what we have is we create for ourselves as a landlord a captive audience once a year with a tenant sustainability roundtable, which is a half-day session inviting our leading tenants in these topics to tackle different subjects, whether it be energy efficiency in their space, whether it's recycling, whether it's occupant health, whether it's the regulatory environment. It's become something that our tenants have grown to look forward to it. I look forward to it myself. I learn a lot from these tenants. And it's just an example of how you can bring your leading tenants together to develop best practices. We're aware that not every tenant has this level of interest. In fact, the majority don't. And so it's a struggle and a challenge, quite honestly, to engage the tenants on these topics. But lessons learned from our leading tenants are those that we can at least try to apply to those who are middling or perhaps trailing the pack on these topics. And so the Sustainability Roundtable, that series that we've created, actually, we all walk away with fresh ideas of how to tackle these challenges and perhaps the lack of interest we're seeing elsewhere in the portfolio. It is encouraging to report that I would say the list of tenants who are engaged, who we do consider leaders, has grown every year, and I think that this group, will grow with that. So we hope that the influence that these roundtables have on our portfolio will get greater with each year. And then finally, this is just some examples of the information we do circulate with all of our tenants. So while the leading tenants are part of the roundtable, every one of our tenants actually gets this information. So on the right is a template of the sub-meter bill that we've developed for our portfolio. What we realized was you can't just provide tenants with usage and cost information. It's often the case that the bill is only going to an AP person or an office manager or somebody who isn't making decisions around energy. By creating certainly a more visually appealing bill template, but also that includes more compelling information, we at least, I think, have upped the chances of furthering the conversation with the tenant around energy and perhaps brainstorming on how to tackle their energy consumption and save money. And then on the right is actually something we've provided for our tenants in New York City. The Mayor's Carbon Challenge for commercial landlords and tenants is a program in place here. We like to encourage our tenants to participate by showing their progress over the year, and if, should they register or put efforts towards their carbon reduction, not only can we put them on a trajectory, but as a landlord we can support them with the right information and a customized report that can highlight their progress. And with that, I will turn it over, I believe, to Mr. Teichman. And thank you all for your time.
Thanks, Dan. Always enjoy hearing Dan speak. And it's a nice segue into my presentation, which is all about engaging commercial tenants in our portfolio. Again, my name is Will Teichman, Senior Director of Strategic Operations for KIMCO Realty Corporation. A little bit of background about KIMCO before I jump into the meat of my presentation. KIMCO is a 50-year-old real estate investment trust, one of the first REITs to go public in the 90s, and currently one of North America's largest owners and operators of open-air shopping centers. So we are a pure-play retail owner and exclusively focused on the open-air sector within that vertical. We have just around 540 employees, and we're headquartered in New Hyde Park, New York, just outside of the city. We're traded on the New York Stock Exchange, and we've really been at our formal sustainability efforts since around 2011 when I joined the company. And today I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the progress that we've made over that time period. Just to give some perspective on our portfolio, currently we own right around 500 shopping centers with about 80 million square feet of leasable space. Most of those properties are located in top metropolitan markets, the top 30 MSAs across the U.S. And you can see based on the map that we're fairly distributed in terms of where we're located, states that we have properties in. And we lease space to large and small retailers really across the spectrum in terms of their size, character, and level of sophistication with respect to sustainability. And some of the folks that we have listed here are some of our largest tenants by leasable space, but really the 80-20 rule kind of applies in our portfolio in that these larger tenants, 20% occupy about 80% of our square footage, but conversely, our small shop tenants are about 80% of our tenant count. So we have a lot of small shop retailers, whether they be traditional kind of mom and pop retailers, franchises, or just smaller format national retail concepts. And in total, we have about 8,000 leased tenant spaces, so quite a large number of spaces that we're ultimately responsible as a part of our portfolio. I'm going to talk a little bit about some additional context in terms of retail. And before I get into talking specifically about retail, I wanted to just provide a little bit of color about the commercial real estate industry in general as we see it. And I dug up this study, which is about 10 years old, but I think is probably still relatively true in terms of the distribution of space across the U.S. commercial building stock in 2009. This is the breakout of how those properties are classified in terms of their use type. So it's interesting to sort of see what that mix of space looks like, with industrial and multifamily being the two largest segments, followed by retail, office, and then some additional more specialized uses. So it's quite a broad distribution in terms of use type. Retail, which is for the segment that we occupy, is about 20% of the commercial building stock. And within those sectors, different lease structures prevail. And Dan talked a little bit about electric inclusion and the concept specifically of utilities and how utilities are treated within leases. I like to think about the world of leases as kind of broadly occupying a spectrum, with one end of the spectrum being a gross lease, which is a lease in which the tenant is paying largely a sort of an all-inclusive rent amount that covers everything. And in the traditional sense, that would include things like utility charges, a blanket fee that they're going to pay on a per month or annual basis for things like electric consumption. And the landlord really bears responsibility for a lot of the maintenance and building improvements, capital improvements to the building, at least as it pertains to the sort of the core infrastructure in that building. On the other end of the spectrum are net leases. And as Dan said, there's some trend in this direction, even in traditionally gross lease sectors like office, moving in the direction of more of a net lease, which is kind of the flip side or the opposite of what's happening in a gross lease situation. So a tenant is still obviously paying rent, but that rent is really exclusively for the use of the space and it is not an all-inclusive amount. So many of the other expenditures associated with operating that property, whether it be things like real estate taxes, insurance charges, and maintenance expenses, are pass-through charges or are incurred directly by the tenant themselves. And this is really where our properties sit for the most part, and most of those 8,000 tenant spaces are is more kind of on the net lease side of things. So most of our tenants have their own meter for utilities, and if they don't, we're working similar to Dan and Vornado on getting them meters so that we have that kind of economic incentive to save. Just the other piece of context that I wanted to share before I talk a little bit about some of our programs is what a retail shopping center typically looks like. And the example that I have here is sort of a blended average of many of our properties that we own across the country. And in general, I would say that approximately 15 to 20% of energy use at a typical grocery-anchored shopping center is directly under the control and management of the landlord, like KIMCO, which means that conversely, the other 85–80% of consumption is really driven by and kind of within the direct control of the tenants, meaning that this consumption is being driven by what's happening in their spaces, so HVAC, lighting, plug loads, and other types of consumption. And I think this generally holds true to other utilities as well, like water. So in our context, we're sort of in this unique position where in order to get to the lion's share of the pie in terms of the consumption and trying to drive better efficiency and better use and stewardship of those resources, we have to find ways to partner together with our tenants. So in terms of our program that we launched in 2011, we have taken sort of a multi-step approach, and a lot of what we started with were the things that were directly within our control. So that 15% of the pie that we have direct responsibility and control of. And that was a good way to get started. We did things like instituting a robust utility management program to get our arms around some of our data. We did things like building automation and controls in our common areas and lighting retrofits in our common areas, and many other initiatives aimed at really getting that slice of the pie under better management. And those efforts have paid off pretty significantly with a substantial reduction in our consumption over that period of time. And so now where we are is in a place where, although we certainly have not exhausted all of the opportunities for efficiency in our own realm, that we are in a position where we're ready to sort of focus on our tenants and see ways that we can help to influence the consumption that's occurring in that portion of our properties. So I have a couple of examples that I wanted to talk about quickly today, just to give you sort of a sense of some of the things that we're trying to do to affect change in those areas, recognizing that at the end of the day, per the terms of most of our leases, we don't have operational control on a day-to-day basis over what's happening in the space. So the first thing that we can obviously do is have an effect on how that space is built out initially. So we've worked to create a construction standard in partnership with some of our friends at US EPA Energy Star that is really focused on trying to create a base expectation in terms of how these spaces are built out. So our base program is really focused on largely low and no cost, no additional cost items that a tenant can implement within their scope of construction to improve the sustainability of their space. And so you can see a list of what some of those items are, and the green dots represent some of the areas where we've identified sustainability criteria. We also have a premium version of the specification, which is a LEED ready for LEED certification version of this, which really focuses on additional improvements, largely to electrical consuming systems such as lighting and HVAC. And in trying to identify a standard to apply for that premium kind of level of build out, we really made a really concerted effort to focus on those improvements or efficiency improvements that would pay back within a typical tenant lease term, which is 5 years across our portfolio. So this is something that we've rolled out as kind of a standard in all of our leases. It's an expectation that we put on tenants. Obviously, the scope of build-outs varies depending upon the existing condition of the space and on the type of tenant that's moving into it. But it's something that we've tried to institute over the last couple of years to establish a level of consistency. And we believe that that will pay dividends over the term of the lease in terms of the tenant occupant. Second thing we've been focused on is on submetering. Very similar to a lot of the points that Dan made. I see all of the same reasons why it makes sense to have all of our tenants either directly metered or potentially submetered in the case that KIMCO is responsible for a shared meter on the property. We have a lot of direct metering, a pretty high percentage of our portfolio direct metered on electric, but we have a very significant portion of our portfolio with respect to water that is not submetered. And so recognizing that both water and energy are important resources that we need to conserve, we have really made a big push over the last couple of years around submetering all forms of utilities, all three major utilities for each retail tenant. So there are about 300 properties in scope of our initiative to submeter all tenant spaces for all three major utilities by the end of this year. We're almost there. I'm excited to say we've installed about close to 5,000 individual submeters at a pretty significant expense to our company. That being said, we're already starting to see the dividends being paid, and there has actually been surprisingly a payback to us. To Dan's point around some of the accounting headaches and issues associated with trying to recover costs that have been billed historically based on square footage allocations, we've actually seen a pretty significant uptick in our recovery of those costs as a result of submetering, because tenants feel that it's a more transparent, accurate method for billing, and so there are less questions and less disputes outstanding. So I wouldn't be surprised if in a short number of years we have paid back our investment in submetering strictly on the basis of improved recovery rates of those costs, putting aside all of the other benefits that Dan spoke to. And the last thing I just wanted to mention is a focus on operations. Again, we are not directly responsible for operating the businesses that are within these 8,000 tenant spaces, but there are certainly things that we can do to share knowledge and best practices with our tenants to help them operate more efficiently. So we recognize that for most tenants, most retailers expend an additional 5 to 10% of their total sales to cover things like utilities, maintenance, marketing, and other expenses. And so we view this as a competitive advantage for KIMCO tenants, for tenants that are occupying our centers, is that we can help them to have a lower cost of occupancy, therefore being more competitive just as a business as a whole. So we've done a few things. We've developed a set of sustainability tip sheet that we distribute and educate all of our tenants on. These are common sense measures, low cost and no cost measures that they can use to improve the efficiency of their spaces. It includes things like benchmarking using Energy Star Portfolio Manager, and we actually developed this tip sheet in conjunction with our partners at Energy Star. We've also worked through the SCORE program, which is a national advisory nonprofit for small businesses in America, to help them educate some of their members, many of whom are our tenants, around best practices. And then finally, we have a large initiative around fixed CAM, which I won't get deep into the weeds on, aside from just saying that we have found over time that some of the ways that historically retail leases have been written with respect to common area expense recovery has disincentivized us from taking on large capital retrofits in the common area. So we've worked to convert a lot of our tenants over to a fixed CAM model where we know every month what we're going to collect in terms of recoverable expenses, which gives us the certainty that we need to go out and invest in the type of efficiency measures that can improve efficiency within the common area. So with that, I will wrap up my comments. There's a couple of follow-ups here and some contact information for anybody who's interested in reaching out. And I am going to pass the baton now off to Sam.
All right, thank you, Will. And let's see, I can get this thing going. Here we are. So good afternoon, everyone, and good morning for the folks that are on the West Coast. I am Sam Stockdale. My team leads operational and sustainability energy initiatives for JPMorgan Chase's global portfolio. We are a proud first-time Partner of the Year winner with the Energy Star program, and we are an active participant in the Charter Tenant program as well. And actually, before I jump into my presentation here, I do want to say a few things about the Charter program because here at JPMorgan, we're really excited about this opportunity. We participated in the pilot project in 3 distinct regions. And for anyone who's ever set foot on a trading floor, you can imagine that the occupancy density is pretty tight. And so when you think about the data load and how many people we actually fit within our floor plates, it makes Energy Star and LEAD for that matter very hard to achieve in a lot of my commercial portfolio. So, you know, it's music to my ears to hear Will and Dan talk about tenant submetering because I come from Tishman Speyer, who's a large owner-operator, where I was a director of regional property management for 6 years, and we were always beating the tenant submetering drum. It's a little bit different now that I'm in the owner-operator-occupier space because it presents different challenges for what we're able to accomplish and how we actually look at the building energy envelope as a whole. So the Energy Star Tenant Charter Program allows me to achieve an Energy Star rating within different floors of my buildings and be able to set certain spaces apart for recognition, whereas before I wasn't able to achieve Energy Star at a lot of my portfolio. So we're pretty excited about the upcoming release of more information on the Charter Program and to see where this thing goes. So with that, I will kind of jump into the history here at JPMorgan and our new commitment to sustainability. I'll back up a little bit because JPMorgan Chase, we're not known as being a real estate company. We're a bank. Real estate is not our core competency. We want to lend. We want to fund. And actually, we have the real estate group on the asset management side of the firm who has 200 million square feet of Class A iconic real estate under management through JVs with partners like Vornado, with the Tishman Spires, and so on and so forth. That's not necessarily what my group does. My group sits on the corporate side where we have 75 million square feet of space spanning in 63 countries. And I have everything under the sun. I got 28 data centers, I have 5,500 retail banking branches, and I have about 1,000 commercial office sites. So we really have a lot to play with, and we have a very large energy footprint. We have about 2 terawatt hours of annual energy under our management. And just to put that into context, it's about the size of a nuclear power plant going at 50% capacity for the entire year. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here because traditionally, we don't see real estate as an NOI or revenue-generating mechanism. The bank sees real estate as a service. Where we want to go, where we want to open lines of business, typically the real estate function will provide real estate for our bank and our lines of bank to live in. So it's a little bit different game for me. For that reason, JPMorgan, we were never into the energy efficiency space. I only have 7 million square feet of LEED certified space. I think I only had a handful of Energy Star certified buildings across my global portfolio. So really there was a lot of low-hanging fruit. My whole group is a complete change of the guard from a few years ago. 2 years ago, my group came in and we were floating markets and we were essentially not paying any attention to our energy density, and we were just buying RECs for about 10% of our portfolio to at least measure up against our competitors like Bank of America, who had evolved a little bit more in their sustainability strategy. But before we came up with our 100% renewable energy commitment, this thing really happened organically, and it's pretty cool. So I just want to take a few minutes to talk about it before I get into engaging our tenancy and our occupancy and also our customers and clients of the firm, which is a very big reason for why we're doing what we're doing. But essentially, our new head of real estate and head of property management, when they came into the firm, they started touring all the bank branches. And they realized that we have all these old incandescent light bulbs, they're different colors, we have air conditioning and heating are fighting each other in bank branches and commercial office space, and really no one had a handle on this stuff. So we went to GE, who is one of the largest clients of the bank and a big partner of ours, and we said, hey, can we put together a large LED lighting deal where we retrofit all 5,500 of my bank branches, and we retrofit the 120 of my commercial office buildings that I outright own. And essentially everyone laughed at us and told us that we couldn't get this thing done, but we were able to secure a $168 million deal with GE to complete this entire LED retrofit, and we've just finished up this month. And the end result is that we are going to end up with a 10% energy reduction in our global footprint. So with that precedent, we are able to say, hey, energy efficiency makes sense. And as a caveat, coming from Tishman-Speyer, and I think Dan and Will can probably relate to this, we used to always say that we were green when it was just a color, right? Because a lot of energy efficiency measures, they just make bottom line sense. They're no-brainers. So once we got the LED deal done, we went a little bit further and we said, let's look at BMS. Because again, we were not a sophisticated operator. We didn't have basic things like BMS in our properties. So we did another deal with GE, $48 million deal to install building management systems in all of our retail bank branches. And we also retrofit a lot of the old Siemens systems in our commercial office space. We put together a central NOC so that we have better control over operations with just HVAC, irrigation, sprinkler, lighting controls, and all that good stuff across my portfolio. After that success, our operating committee at JPMorgan Chase came back to my group and said, all right, guys, we want to lead the sustainability space. So put together a 100% operational renewable commitment that doesn't hinge on buying RECs. We don't want to buy RECs. So we spent a few months going to the drawing board and trying to underwrite projects and see how we get here. So that was publicly announced back in July, and it hinges on 3 general strategies for how we're going to achieve this renewable energy commitment. The first one is what I've already talked about, is just basic building energy efficiency, something that everybody on the line here is very familiar with. Essentially, it's your LEDs, your BMS, your ice storage tanks where you can pull it off, and your chiller retrofits, just basic bottom line HVAC controls, capital investments to improve the NOI and your OpEx within the property. Once you do that, you have a better baseline for your global or portfolio energy consumption. And then you can really start playing with some interesting things. And that's exactly what we've done here at JPMorgan Chase. We have an on-site renewable energy program where we are actively installing solar panels at 2,000 retail banking branches in 23 states. Every single one of these properties is on our 5-year plus asset hold strategy, and this program is entirely an equity play. We are not doing this through PPAs. These are entire capital outlays to the tune of about $1 billion across my entire portfolio. On the commercial side, I'm also doing solar. I have solar development going on at about 40 commercial campuses between rooftop, in-ground, carport, and garage canopy. We have a couple exciting projects that I can't quite talk about, but they're going to be released soon, where we are developing about 150 megawatts of on-site solar just to address our own operational needs. Once we get through with the solar, we're going to supplement that with fuel cell technology. For those who aren't familiar with fuel cells, it's similar to cogen, whereas it has no moving parts. It's essentially natural gas flowing through a reformer and being converted into energy and heat and water as a byproduct through a chemical reaction. And some states, like in New York City, where you don't have a lot of room for on-site energy mechanisms like solar, a fuel cell is a good option because you get good energy density from a very small footprint. And also fuel cells, for those who don't know, are actually classified as a Source 1 renewable attribute. So I think it's in Delaware, New York, Connecticut, and all over the Northeast where you can actually put in a fuel cell and you can claim that it's as good as solar and wind. So that's why we have a large fuel cell program. We cannot do battery storage here at the bank quite yet. We believe in lithium-ion. We also believe in a couple other emerging technologies like zinc bromine. Problem with lithium-ion is that anyone on the line who is a part of a Fortune 500 company and you have a large environmental health and safety group internal to your organization, they're not going to like fully charged batteries sitting inside a occupied space and also the New York Fire Department, who is usually the one that folks look to approve these kinds of new technologies. They're not quite there on getting these kinds of systems through National Electric Code, and also the National Fire Protection Association of America is also not quite there on levying some kind of determination on how fire suppression for a battery would work. So I think that we will probably sit on the sidelines until a better or a more clear understanding for how the fire control part of a battery is handled. But once it is, then we'll be probably on that boat as well for my on-site renewable energy program. We expect to offset about 20% of my annual energy use through on-site renewable energy systems, which is pretty exciting for us. For everything that I can't do between building efficiency and on-site renewable energy sources, I'm going to be executing power purchase agreements. So that's my off-site wind and solar farms, utility scale. We had success as a pilot by securing a 100 megawatt wind farm in Arath County, Texas that we've dubbed named Project Buckthorn, internal to the bank. It's a very unique arrangement because our portfolio alone can't take the entire capacity of that wind farm. So I've gone in partnership with my bankers across the street in the commodities group to offtake with me and actually offer a hedge back out to the developer of that wind farm so that they can face one offtaker for the entire transaction, which is pretty unique in off-site solar and wind development. So that's kind of the bird's eye view of how we're planning to get to our commitment here. And let's see if I can move on to my next slide. There we go. So now that I have my large blanket approval for trying to do what I'm trying to do, I'm actually on the site. I'm implementing these programs. I mentioned that I'm almost done with the LED program. I'm almost done with my building management system program. So all the folks in my sites, they know who we are because we're in the site and we're actually changing out the bulbs and they're seeing the results because, again, I'm an owner-occupier operator. So we are all internal to the bank. And when we have announcements in our internal portal, people see that we're making these large commitments to sustainability and energy efficiency. It's also what's allowed me to achieve the new Energy Star Partner of the Year. Without all these energy efficiency programs, I don't think 5 out of my 5,500 retail bank branches would have qualified for Energy Star. But now that I'm starting to have some success, all of my bank branches are starting to very slowly fall into line to an achievable status where I can actually apply and get certification through Energy Star. So this year, we are able to get 108 Energy Star certifications across my bank branches all over the country. So that led us to a very unique opportunity in engaging my tenants, not just my tenants, but also my occupants, the clients of the bank. So when I had all of my Energy Star team actually going to the sites and doing all the indoor readings and counting all the light bulbs and looking at where all the people sit, we actually had people coming up to them saying, hey, what are you guys doing here? We're hearing about JPMorgan Chase's commitment to sustainability. You know, what does this all mean? What do you know, what's coming up next? What do you guys have in the pipeline? And so we were really excited to engage all these folks because A, we're all technical nerds and we love this stuff. And B, you know, we do have a lot of exciting things coming down the pipeline. So we were able to talk about the upcoming solar panel installation. We were able to talk about our fuel cell systems, which are really exciting, and we're bringing a couple of new products to market, which might include small capacity fuel cells that aren't necessarily a renewable energy play in all markets, but they do serve as a resiliency play in a lot of markets. And we think that if we can keep some of our banks up and running with ATMs delivering cash and environmental disasters or natural disasters and have the Chase sign lit up on a retail banking branch because we have a fuel cell that's supplying power to a critical load, we think that's a pretty powerful message. So we're able to talk through a couple of these initiatives that we have going on directly with our banking clients, directly with the tellers in our branches who help then tell our story. So we really use the Energy Star opportunity as a lightning rod to kind of get us out in the field and talk a little bit about what we're doing. The power purchase agreements are a little bit more difficult to talk about because I'm sure some of the folks on the line can appreciate most people who are curious about sustainability might not quite grasp the concepts of sleeving utility scale off-site wind and solar farms through an ESCO for a fully shaped product that manages your energy efficiency and gives you renewable energy attributes. But for those that do want to hear about it, we were very excited to talk about our pilot project and our wind farm down in Texas and our upcoming initiative to source about 60% of our energy use from off-site sources. So we have about 5 minutes left here. I want to leave a few minutes for questions, so I will hand it back here to, to Stacy.
Great, thank you, Sam, and to our other presenters. So just before we move into Q&A, I just wanted to mention quick some other upcoming webinars you may find of interest. We have our last webinar of the year about preparing for the upcoming metric updates, and then there's a couple others listed here that you can find more details on at the